Okay, we'll call the meeting to order here for our special school board meeting for the 100-day plan and review. See, I need a motion to approve our agenda.
So moved.
Motion been made and seconded to approve our agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have an agenda. At this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Horton. It's all yours. The floor is yours.
All right. All right. Thank you, members of the board. Good evening, community. Really excited to be here tonight. We have a very special presentation for you tonight, in which we will be reviewing the first 100 days of the superintendency here that have been had the great opportunity to be a part of here in GFW. We also have some extra people coming here today, and they're going to be sharing some information on our next steps. And so collectively, we're going to talk about where we've been over the last 100 days and where we're going to be going over the next 6 months, which will lead into the next few years. We started our presentation with our title slide, Defining Our Why. This title came from our listening tour and listening to our community members about what they want to see out of GFW. And I had a great opportunity to spend the last 100 days meeting with lots of different stakeholders. And I'll talk through some of those different pieces here tonight. And what I've really heard from people is wanting to define what GFW is. What is our why? Who are we? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight, both what I've learned over the 100 days, things we've accomplished, and where we need to go next. So first, I want to start with a summary of the 100-day plan. Back in July, the presentation that we did for our 100-day plan talked about a budget, talked about COVID-19 and getting ready for that, a review of our facilities. Facilities has been something that has been very important to our community. It's been a hot topic, so we want to spend some time looking at that. And also a listening tour, spending time getting to know board members, getting an opportunity to talk to our community, our staff, our students, our parents and families. And so I want to review with you what we've done over the last 100 days, what we've accomplished, and then we'll lead into what we're going to be doing next. To start with is the budget. We are currently in statutory operating debt. What that means is that we are in the hole over 2.5% of our budget. We need to get out of that, and we heard that from our community. That's part of the reason we went out and asked the community to pass an operating levy. One of the first things that we did is we restructured our administration. When we restructure our administration, we are saving $98,140.94 from last year to this upcoming fiscal year. So the very first thing we did is we saved $100,000 by our administrative restructure. Our school board went out to the community and asked a question. We asked the community to support us in supporting our students. Our voters responded overwhelmingly with a 63% yes. That is really significant. And we will be looking at a projected $789,139.20 for our next fiscal year. We'll start building those dollars into our next fiscal year budget. And that's really exciting. So we have new revenue coming in, which is going to help us support programming. Another thing that we did, the board just passed a refinance of our OPEB bonds. This passes $36,720 back to our community. So these are taxes that our community would have paid, but by doing a refinance, we're saving them that money. That is not going to the school district, that's going directly to our taxpayers. Something that's really important in budgeting is how accurate and how close are you when you set a budget. Our community has asked us to make sure we live within our means, and I want to make sure that we pointed out that as we're concluding our audit right now, we are within 0.05% accurate on our budget projections. That is pretty amazing. And business manager Heine has been absolutely wonderful with that. She's done a great job of projections and helping us know when we can spend and when we can't spend. If you're within 1% of your budget, if you're accurate within 1%, that's considered really, really good. So to be at 0.5%, that's amazing. So she did an absolutely wonderful job. And the 0.5% that we're talking about, she actually we're actually a little bit ahead. We're about $50,000 ahead or so projected. So we came in a little bit better than we thought, but still very accurate. The next piece is really exciting. Business manager Heidi and I spent time looking at the budget, looking at fiscal year 21. That's the current budget that we're in. And then we went back and also looked at our last fiscal year 20. And until we finish the audit, we can still make adjustments and coding adjustments within our budget. Well, we sat down and took a look at how we were coding things, and we found out that we were not coding things as efficiently as we could. In education, you get money through lots of different funding sources. You get funding for special education. You get funding for title, for example. All these different things that have strings attached or have restrictions. We took a look at those restrictions and we made sure that we utilized those restrictions first and did that well, which then frees up general education revenue, general fund revenue. And by doing that, we were able to actually come up with an additional $450,000 to save our district. That is absolutely huge. Our school district was projecting almost a $1.1 million unassigned negative fund balance moving into this fiscal year, at the end of this fiscal year after the audit was completed. Our updated number right now is a negative $580,000. That is what we are projecting right now. The audit is still finishing up. We're in the last few phases of that, and it'll be done this month, I believe. Business Manager Hein, is that correct? It'll be done this month? Yeah, roughly this month it'll be finished. And so once we get that completed, we'll have an actual number, but we're projecting about, we're doing a lot better than we thought. This is really exciting. We heard our community say we need to get out of statutory operating debt. We haven't even started using the levy dollars, but we started taking some of those restricted funds and also using one-time monies. We don't want to use one-time monies on ongoing costs. We are using these one-time funds on our debt, and our debt is one-time debt. We need to fix our budget so we don't incur new debt, and that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later. But by using these one-time funds, we are able to make one-time adjustments, and that's why you're able to see the savings here. So that is really exciting. We are going to continue to work in the budget for this fiscal year, and we anticipate that we'll be moving out of statutory debt much more quickly because of these efficiencies. We do believe that we can make some of these same efficiencies in fiscal year 21. And so we are feeling very optimistic about where we will be as a school district as we move into July 1, which will be our next fiscal year 22. But it's not enough. We can't do this forever. We need to continue to find ways to take apart our budget and put it back together in a way that makes sense and in a way that is sustainable. Part of the 100-day plan talked about developing a legislative platform. We really talked about that in relationship to finance. We talked about that cross-subsidy, that in special education our cross-subsidy is about $1 million, and how we're not seeing some of the funding that we need. I've been working with AASA, which is the National Superintendents Association. I've been working with the Minnesota School Board Association, with the State Superintendents Association. I'm also a member of the Special Education Association. I used to be a director of student services, the Minnesota Rural Education Association, and the Minnesota Association for School Business at the bottom, MASBO. I will be working in conjunction with them to develop a legislative platform. I am on the legislative committee for our state with MASA, so I'll be working with them. I have 2 meetings this week to help develop a legislative platform and make sure that GFW has a voice in their platforms, and then also tying our platforms to them, and I'll be bringing that information forward. So we'll be working with the legislature to make sure that we're doing things that are helpful for GFW. We did a big presentation on COVID-19 at our last school board meeting, and for those of you who are online, encourage you to go back and check that out if you want to see that. We did that in partnership with Grenville County and Sibley County Public Health. That was very helpful and informational to have them there. We currently have all day, every day school. Some districts don't have the space to have all day, every day school. They have to have half the students one day, half the students another day. Our staff stepped up and said, we can find out a way to make this work, and it's not going to be easy. And our staff have been busting their tails to try to make this happen for our community members. They're working super hard. They're working every day at it, and we're finding ways to continue to get better at this. And I'm extremely proud of our staff. The first day of school, walking around, the things that they were able to turn on was just amazing. And it's hard to sustain that. We have to keep working to find ways to support them through that. But I've been so impressed with how they've risen to the occasion. I believe that education is a place of service. You go into this profession because you want to serve others. And our teachers, our paraprofessionals, our food service staff, our bus drivers, everyone across the district, and people across the state are stepping up to say, how can I help and support in this time? And so a huge hat off to our staff. We have increased access. We have been equitable in our approach to education. We have more devices in students' hands. We are getting internet to students who don't have it. I just received a message tonight from our cultural liaison that says, I have a family who doesn't have internet access. Can we still do that? I said, let's get a hold of Mr. Warner. He's going to be on top of that. We're going to make sure that they have that internet access, that they can access the tools that we need to have. We are increasing access and taking down barriers for our students in our community. Our schools are also safe. We're doing a great job of following protocols and helping people feel safe at school. We're continuing to evaluate that as the guidance changes and find new ways to do that. For example, we just went out and bought 21 new lunch tables from NARDS. Okay, we got some plastic ones in order to help with social distancing. We found that some of the seats that we're using just weren't helping students make social distancing decisions all the time. So we found a way to reorganize that. That's great that we were able to do that. We've been able to add some additional staff, actually, and this is all within our means. These are not adds-ons to what the state approved in our SOD plan. We've been able to work the budget, as I said, to find opportunities. We have a social emotional learning position that will be starting at the elementary school to support our students and their mental health needs and teach them positive expectations. This person will be also working with those students who are identified as higher risk based on different assessments that we're doing. And then they will be working in more small groups with those students. So we're really excited for that person to start. It's also going to give our teachers some additional preparatory time so they can work with distance learners and get ready for the lessons, which you know that are challenging. We've also been able to add a few staff in our lunchroom area to try to increase the amount of time at our secondary for preparation. We need to continue to find ways to make our schools safe and ways to continue to make people feel welcome here and ways to help our teachers prepare. So there's still more work to do, but in the first 100 days, we've really gotten off to a great start with that, and our staff have been amazing. A facilities review. When I first started, the Fairfax building was supposed to close on, I believe it was July 31st. We pushed that day back to give it more time and allow me more time to learn about the community and learn about that property. I also reviewed R.A. Morton's study. So they did a facility study across all of our buildings, had a chance to review those documents and have multiple meetings with them. We did a space assessment. We found out that we had over double the state average in space with all three buildings. We also found out that even with two buildings, we were well above the state average. We found out that because of that, we found out that because of that, we could get students in school all day, every day. So that was really exciting that we were able to do that. We are in the process of developing a 10-year long-term facilities and maintenance plan. We did bring a plan to you earlier this summer and early fall, but we're going to be going back and updating that. R.A. Morton is going to be able to help us go through that study and to give us some suggestions. I'll be working with our facility manager to ensure that our buildings can continue to service our students and our community in the way that they're designed to. We also have an offer on the Fairfax property. We are currently in negotiations. That was directed at our last board meeting where the board had asked me to negotiate with Retro Outfitters. We have since actually received additional people interested in the building, but this time we are working with that group and we're going to continue to work with them because that was the direction of the board. A listening tour. It was absolutely wonderful how many people welcomed me in the community. The people of Fairfax are absolutely amazing. I think about one night in particular. I was sitting out at one of our farms in Fairfax, and they were all pointing to where their house was. I couldn't see any houses anywhere, but they'd say over that hill and so more over here. That's where I live. And they all started doing this way. They all pointed every direction but one, and I think that's where they sent the superintendents they weren't happy with. That's where you had to walk. So it's yet to be seen. They haven't sent me walking out that direction yet, thankfully, but hopefully they won't. Wonderful people, great questions, and not all people that had positive things to say, and that's okay. We are a community, and we need to create a space where we can have dialogue and problem solve together. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to continuing to doing. I was able to meet with families. I was able to meet with local businesses. It was absolutely great to meet some of our business owners, some of our church leaders, attend community events. I got a chance to meet with all of our school board members and get a chance to know each of you better. Chair Clank, we were just talking earlier today how our first meeting took place at a baseball field out in Norwood Young America. And because of social distancing, we couldn't go anywhere else. We sat on a baseball field and we talked about how we can support GFW. We really appreciated you meeting me out there that day. That was, I'll never forget that. I've had a chance to meet with students, our staff, working with the media, former GFW leaders around the state that are now in different positions. I've been able to reconnect not only with old superintendents, business managers, other staff. It's been really great. People that have now become superintendents in other districts that maybe were part of this community at one time. Our culture liaison, Cecilia Zendejas, has been absolutely wonderful in connecting me to our Latinx community. I was able to do house visits with them. I was able to go meet them in the community. They came to school. Just recently, I had 8 online meetings, 4 in English and Spanish, to connect with our different families. I have regular weekly meetings with area superintendents, as well as local and state elected officials. I've had an opportunity to meet with them and talk with them too. So that's really exciting, and there's more work to be done there. But those are some things that I've been able to accomplish in the first 100 days. Some things that people have been telling me through the first 100 days and I'm listening to is that our staff are amazing. And that's true. If you look at the Minnesota Department of Education report card, you'll see that the Minnesota Student Survey tells you that our students feel that way. Our community feels this way, and I heard that through the listening tour, and we see this in how they're stepping up to serve right now in the classroom and support our learners. They know how important education is, and they are really rising to the occasion to try to help our students. Our community said we want our students back in school. So how can we make that happen? And we do have school every day, all day. It's not easy all the time to do that. It's hard. But our staff are finding ways to make it work administratively. They're working all the time to try to support our staff, and we're continuing to work together to try to find ways to meet their needs. They want our schools to be safe. Across the state of Minnesota and in GFW as well, we are not seeing a lot of cases in schools, and we're not seeing a lot of spread within the schools based on the data that we're showing. And this is not just GFW, this is schools everywhere. The guidance is working in a lot of different ways to help keep people safe. The better job we keep implementing that, the better job we'll do. We actually just started a walkthrough tool. So we have a new walkthrough tool that says, what does school safety look like? This is part of continuous improvement. So as our administrators are walking through the building, they can go through this walkthrough tool and they're checking boxes and they're collecting that data. And then they're going to sit down with their teachers and the continuous improvement teams to review that data and say, hey, you know what, where can we make adjustments to make schools safe? So we're not only just trying to follow guidance, we're collecting data on it and we're responding to that data. Just like a classroom teacher does when you walk in, they're going to assess if you learned something. And if they don't, they're going to give you some reteaching or make some adjustments. We're doing the same thing. This is new for all of us, and we're going to collect data and keep trying to improve ourselves. We heard our community say that, Superintendent Horton, we got to get out SOD. We are doing that. We have made significant reductions in our statutory operating debt. We were looking at about 1.1 million. Now we're at about negative 580,000. And we are very optimistic about where we could potentially be even by the end of next year. So we're really excited about where we could be going based on some of these efficiencies. So our community has spoken to us. We've listened and we applied some of these over the first 100 days. And so we're really making some great gains. There's also been a lot of hurt in the community, and I need to acknowledge that, and I need to say that out loud, and people need to hear that closing a school is really hard. Absolutely is absolutely hard. I have seen very few places where people have welcomed an idea like that. But people are really tired of the hurt. That was something I heard the most. It's that we're tired of the hurt. We want you to honor how we feel. We want you to recognize the history here, but we want to see a path forward. And that's what tonight is really about. And that's when we get back to our why, is what is it that we want to be moving forward? We're at a critical point in our district to talk about where we want to go moving forward. And we need to do it as a full community. It's going to take all of us, not some of us, but all of us to come together and say, this is what we want GFW to look like. So why GFW? I want to share a little bit more about that. And I'm going to play a short video. And Mr. Werner, let me know if our sound comes through okay.
Yep.
At one point in my life, I did do civics and social studies, and like any good civics and social studies teacher, you always find a way to incorporate a video clip. That's just what we do, right? So I'm going to show you a little video clip. This gentleman's name is Simon Sinek.
Call it the golden circle. Why, how, what? This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why, I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations, regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else, a marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done, that's how most sales is done, and that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do, we say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior or purchase or vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This explains why every single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3 player from Apple, or a phone from Apple, or a DVR from Apple. But as I said before, Apple's just a computer company. There's nothing that distinguishes them structurally from any of their competitors. Their competitors are all equally qualified to make all of these products. In fact, they tried. A few years ago, Gateway came out with flat screen TVs. They're eminently qualified to make flat screen TVs. They've been making flat screen monitors for years. Nobody bought one. Dell came out with MP3 players and PDAs. And they make great quality products, and they can make perfectly well-designed products. And nobody bought one. In fact, talking about it now, we can't even imagine buying an MP3 player from Dell. Why would you buy an MP3 player from a computer company? But we do it every day. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. When we communicate from the outside in, Yes, people can understand vast amounts of complicated information like features and benefits and facts and figures. It just doesn't drive behavior. When we communicate from the inside out, we're talking directly to the part of the brain that controls behavior, and then we allow people to rationalize it with the tangible things we say and do. This is where gut decisions come from. You know, sometimes you can give somebody all the facts and the figures and they say, I know what all the facts and details say, but it just doesn't feel right. Why would we use that verb? It doesn't feel right. Because the part of the brain that controls decision-making doesn't control language. And the best we can muster up is, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Or sometimes you say you're leading with your heart, or you're leading with your soul. Well, I hate to break it to you, those aren't other body parts controlling your behavior. It's all happening here in your limbic brain, the part of the brain that controls decision-making and not language. But if you don't know why you do what you do, and people respond to why you do what you do, then how will you ever get people to vote for you or buy something from you, or more importantly, be loyal?
So when we think about our why, we need to capture that. And when I listened to our community, I heard that from lots of different people. And I think 63% of people voted for our levy to say, yes, we believe in the district, but we need to capture that why. We need to put that out there, and we need to talk about it, we need to celebrate it. And we need to hear from all people about what that why is. We can have the greatest programs in the world and all the things that he talked about and apply, that's that brain research, that's executive functioning. We can speak to all that in the world. But when I think about, when I went and talked to community members who felt hurt, I talked about that earlier. What they were talking about was exactly this. Their why was something else. And they had an emotional response to that. And we have to understand that we need to work with that. And we need to move forward as an organization, defining our why and saying, who are we? What do we want to be? What is our why? And then have a plan to set out and achieve it. So one of the first things we need to do, though, before we even get to that, is we have to fix our budget. We've been taking down our debt, so we've been doing a great job with that. But we also have to fix it. We have to fix our budget and make it sustainable over time. And so that's where the next session comes in. And I want to introduce Dr. Lager to come up here and talk about the OBA process that GFW Schools is going to be going through to help right-size our budget.
Do I need the mic or?
Nope.
Okay, good.
Just.
All right, thank you, Jeff. It was inspiring to watch. He's done a lot of great things here in a short period of time, and you know, from an outside person looking in, I just want to commend you for all those things. I'm not sure that many districts accomplish all those things in 100 days every year. So congratulations to you in your first 100 days. I'm here tonight. A little over a year ago, I started doing some work with Baird. Had a situation where there was a school district in the southern part of the state that in 2016 had a $4 million fund balance. They were down to a $2 million fund balance, and they were deficit spending at $891,000. And I got a call from their superintendent and said, we're in a lot of trouble financially. And I had developed a model, which we'll call the OBA model for tonight, that I had used really when I worked in a district. We had to cut 5 out of the 7 years we had to cut, and we had to cut as much as $10 million one of those years. And another challenge we actually had to cut money to put it in a fund balance. And you want to know when it's really difficult for your community is when you're cutting money to put it in the bank. But what I did is there was never a good reason or a good answer as to why we were making these reductions. So I developed this model and I began applying it. And in this model, and I'll get to this at the end, where I can manipulate and I can plug any district in from across the state. And what it does is it looks at 7 key expenditure areas. It'll look at district administration, school administration, regular instruction, instructional support, pupil support, operational maintenance, and transportation. Those are the 7 things that I identified over time that have a significant impact on a school district's budget. Jeff talked about it earlier. We get funds in our what's called UFARS codes and in buckets. And what's really hard, you know, one thing that you won't see on there is special education, because we have maintenance of effort requirements. We have different funds that come in to support special ed. But when cross subsidy becomes an issue, that can affect what happens in our general budget too, but I don't put it in there. It's these 7 areas that I found As a result of that, we've worked with 4 districts. One of them right now is sitting on about $892,000 in a fund that they need to really find a way to spend in the next year. Because they're balanced and they're right sized. We've been able to settle those contracts, and the last 2 in that district have been settled in 3 meetings and 4 meetings, where they had been basically in mediation every time before that. So that's one example. The other district, we were able not only to right size that, they fixed their $890,000 problem, and they're on a road tomorrow, similar to you guys, hopefully going to pass a referendum. But what they've done is been able to show their community that all of their 7 areas are balanced now. They had to cut in 4 of those 7 areas, and now they've built plans for what they're going to add with their referendum money, and they'll actually be able to show the community, as a result of a referendum, here's the programs we're going to add, here's what your money's actually going for. I'll work through the PowerPoint here. Here's just a couple of the pieces. You know, we talked a little bit about budgets are becoming increasingly tighter. A lot of people, I'm sure as a board, you've seen the trajectory of what we needed in educational funding versus what we've gotten. Many districts are this painful process of needing to make reductions. And I talk about here a little bit, nothing erodes the culture of an organization more than when you're in a constant stage of having to cut or cut every other year. The first district who's the furthest into this in year 6 made reductions in the first year, had to cut $1 million. I describe it as kind of rip the Band-Aid off. But for the last 5 years, they haven't had to cut or reduce a position they didn't want to. The other 2 districts that we've worked with, one is still in the process. They'll finish up this year, and then if they stay right-sized and meet their student enrollment numbers, they won't have to make a reduction either as well. To avoid this, what I talk about often is you have to establish a systemic approach as a district, so you don't end up in the cycle of having to make cuts. A lot of times when districts make cuts, this was the experience. I remember sitting in a library with about 50 community members and looking at the people at my table and saying, you know, we had to cut $10 million, and really what it was like just throwing spaghetti noodles against the wall to decide we were going to cut. We really didn't have anything to base it off of. We didn't know what we could do or couldn't do. And what I found through developing this process is a lot of times districts will make cuts. There's a district of about 10,000 students that I did an analysis for last spring. They had to cut $5.5 million. They were overspending in 5 of the 7 key areas that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit. They did not cut $1 out of 2 of those 5. And when you don't do that, even if you pass a referendum, I describe it as a boat that's leaking. Your referendum money will go to plug that hole for a while, but if you don't fix that problem in your budget, eventually you can't referendum yourself out of that financial problem. So down the road in this next cycle, they're going to be facing, and in COVID will have a whole different impact, but they were going to be facing potentially another $5 million in cuts because they didn't make cuts in a couple of areas that they weren't right sized. So talk a little bit about the process. What people learn through this process is, the other thing is it takes out the bias of what we should cut or shouldn't cut. A presentation that I did with Mike earlier in this one district we went into, we actually had 54 staff members come to the meeting. They were having some challenges with negotiations at the time, and we actually presented the board with a 2-year plan to fix their budget. They wanted to do it in 1 year, and we actually stayed after for about 45 minutes or an hour and talked with a lot of the staff. When the staff came that night, they were coming because they didn't really believe it was possible to see this picture, and by the end of the night, they walked out saying, okay, we understand it, because in that situation they were overspending in district administration, school administration. They were also overspending in instruction, but they could see why. They had a 4-period day. None of their comparable districts did. So it made the conversation much easier. I talked a little bit about this here. Just reducing, I think this is a key piece. Just reducing your budget doesn't mean you're solving long-term problems. If you make cuts to make cuts, but you're not making cuts where you're overspending, you're going to have long-term financial problems. And I'm going to show you what that looks like when we get the model up here. In our process, the one thing is everybody will be able to see the alignment of the district compared to other districts that are the same structure, size, basically, as you are. We're paid on ADM, which is student enrollment. You know, I used to have people that would come in and want to go line item by line item through a budget. In the district when I began this work, we had about $134 million general fund budget. So you imagine people coming in line item by line item. It's so confusing. They wanted to understand, but they couldn't. What this process does is creates a clear picture for them at a 5,000 foot level where they can see, hey, we're spending the same amount of money as our 5 others in each of these key areas. So they don't have to go line item by line item through the budget. It provides evidence of why the reductions are needed in the certain areas. It creates clarity in the process. So this is actually looking at, I think where you were. Yeah, in 2016, you had an unassigned fund balance of 1.3, an unassigned fund balance then in 17 of 857,000. This is a similar picture to the district I was talking about that in 2016 had a $4 million fund balance. They were down to 2, but deficit spending at 891. You're in statutory operating debt pretty quick. And that's where we were able to apply the OBA model. And now they're back on a track to solidifying their fund balance. And if they pass the referendum tomorrow night, they'll be able to add some of the programming that they're looking to add. But right now you sit, and I think the news Jeff presented earlier is just great news for the community. You know, a $509,000 problem is a lot better than a $1 million problem. So thinking about fund balance, I touched on this a little bit. Fund balances are often misunderstood, but they're extremely important. You want to maintain a certain fund balance so you can make payroll. Because if you're not making payroll, you actually have to borrow money from the bank that you have to pay interest on just to pay your employees. So you have to set an amount. You know, typically I recommend between 8 to 10% of a fund balance. I'll also tell you, I don't think a fund balance should be at 15 or 20%. I think the money should be spent on the kids who are here now. But there also is that buffer zone where you don't want general ed dollars going to pay interest as well. So you want to make sure you have a solid fund balance. Most districts have a fund balance policy. I'm not sure where you guys are here, if you do or you don't, but it's a good idea, at least as a guide. I've worked with districts where one district, the district I was talking about 6 years ago, had a 10% fund balance policy and they were a little over 10. In order to solve their budget problem, they had to take it down to about just under 7.5%. They were still making payroll, but they cut below what their policy was with the intent of getting it back up there. They were able to do that after 1 year, but it also reduced the amount of reductions and cuts they had to make. So it's one of those where you have a policy, they dipped below it, making sure they could still make payroll, and then restored it. And now, like I said, they're actually in a position where they need to spend about $892,000 for a variety of reasons. But this is just a little bit about what our approach is, and then I'm going to show you. I think it becomes a little bit easier when you see the model in the tool we use. But really, there's a multi-phase process. I've been talking to Jeff as long as last summer prior to the referendum. Another district, and actually it's going to be the example I show you here tonight. I was working with a superintendent who inherited a situation where they were heading towards statutory operating debt. Didn't find out until August he had taken a new job. They hadn't adjusted some of their numbers from the year before and were in some significant financial issue. Well, they ran a referendum for $640 per pupil from August to November, probably about the same time frame you guys had to go in here very quick, and they passed, so they were all excited. Well, he actually called me on the phone one day and he's like, you know, we had this meeting, we're talking about all these things we wanted to do with our referendum money, and it doesn't work. And I plugged him into the model and I said, well, that's because if you keep doing everything you're doing now and apply your new levy money, which was about $730,000, I think, they were still $7,000 short. They still had to make reductions just to maintain what they were doing now. So we went through the process, right-sized them, and we'll go through actually what their areas were that they had to fix out of those 7. They're in the process of right-sizing and fixing those, and then they'll be able to use their levy dollars to fulfill the promises they had in their community. The community can see exactly how much levy money is going into each of these buckets. So in these are the phases. I don't need to read all of them to you, but basically, you know, I've met with Jeff. We assessed the financial position, looked at what the short and long-term goals were. He talked a lot about not wanting to be in statutory operating debt and wanting to have stability in your budget. So every year you're not talking about having to make cuts or reductions, or every year you're not talking about having to go back for a referendum. The biggest part of this that I think we have not traditionally done a good job of in education is establishing comparable districts. Everybody has to spend money, but you can only spend $1 one way. But how do you spend those dollars in comparison to the districts that are like you? That helps you build a budget and be responsible in the utilization of your finances. So then what we're going to do is we'll examine expenditures and we rank them, and I'll show you what this looks like in a minute. I'm going to use other districts to show you what we'll actually do for GFW. And then we'll identify the areas where the district is spending the highest amount. You know, the one thing that I talked about initially when I rolled this model out was you can't have the least amount of money. So 724 is what the state allows us to take just on a board vote. And that's what I consider the lowest amount of money. and spend the most in all of the areas. It would be like us in our personal lives. We make X, but we want to live and spend Y. You can't do it. The numbers don't add up. So this actually paints a picture for you where it allows you to see that. And then it looks at what adjustments do we need to make sure we're in alignment. Then what we do is we go out to each of the comparable districts. There'll be 6 others. And we look at what do they have in district administration? What kind of staffing do you have coded there? What do you have in school administration? One of the districts I talked about earlier, the one that had to cut $890-some thousand, had a district the same size, same number of buildings. They had 2 more principals than that district did. And that district actually had levy money, and they, in addition to the 724, and they didn't. So those are some of the things that you start to find through this. We go through and look at operational maintenance. What are you spending there? How many positions do you have? So we get down into the weeds of what is the makeup of every district. So we can look at what does staffing here look like in comparison to all of those additional districts. So if you have to make cuts and reduce a position or positions, people can understand why are you doing that. It's not just, well, we decided we're going to cut 6 teachers. Well, we're cutting 6 teachers, or we're cutting 4 support personnel because we have 6 more or 4 more than what our comparables have. So that's what we get into at phase 5. And then in phase 6, we assist with the implementation process. We come in the case I was just referencing, we went to a board meeting and we gave them a 2-year plan, and they wanted to do it in 1, and I still really encouraged them to do it in 2. Because one of the examples we had shown them was they had about 200 less kids in a high school than one of their comparables, but they had 3 more teachers. And with less kids, you shouldn't, it's because they were on a 4-period day and one of their comparables was on a 7-period day. They actually had to cut 12 staff to get in alignment with where the other districts were because they were one of the last districts on a 4-period day. And so what I told them was culturally, you don't want to just cut 12 teachers in 1 year. It's too big of a jump for your community. So spend a year researching and studying, making the curriculum adjustments you need to get to that 7-period day. So that's where phase 6 was. We went in, we worked with the board, and then I continue. Actually, I just had a conversation today via text with that superintendent. We're still working with them on getting through some of these pieces to getting them to where they want to be right size. So I'm going to show you the model here. I always laugh. I have to put the map of the state with the district numbers up there because my entire process is run through the district numbers, and I hated having to go to my computer to find the map, so I just stuck it right in the model. So that's what always loads up front. But this is not GFW. This is 7 other comparable districts. So this would be Central, Watertown, Mayor, Jordan, Belle Plaine, Sibley East, Tri-City United, and Glencoe Silver Lake looks like it's on the far right. I know I've used LeSueur Henderson with this group too. And basically, if you look student enrollment wise, they're fairly close. There's a set of criteria we use to establish what those comparables are. But if we look at Central there, you can see there a 20, and the low score is what you want. So if you look at that rank number over there, 1 means you're the best. You spend the least amount of money. 7 means you spend the most. So we start by looking at where your rank score is. And so what you have here is you have fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19. So you get to look at 2 fiscal years of audited numbers from the state. And if you saw, they were 29, then they went to 31. And this is when they passed the referendum and they thought, okay, everything's going to be good. But what they realized was when they were a 724 district, so they had they had the lowest amount of money coming in. They had 5s, 6s up on the board, and then in 19 they had 2 7s, a 4, and a 5 on there. You can't spend the most if you don't have the most money coming in. Eventually it doesn't work. So where I moved to is there a pointer here? This box down here is what's key. So what we did is we looked at district administration. They're spending $594,000, which is the same number you'll see here in fiscal year 19. What they actually could afford to spend to get balanced was $494,500. They actually had to cut $99,686 out of district administration.
So, right.
Yep.
Take a step with your laser.
Yep.
18, that was a rank of what?
29.
29 total, and that specific one, the 99,000, what were they ranked at? What was their number? A 6 or a 7?
Up here, the first one, they were a 5.
and then they moved to, that was 18.
19, they went to a 7.
So that, it's just saying that the lowest number gets a rank of 1, highest number gets a 7. Okay, so their district administrative spending didn't move that much, but the other two districts that were in competition in that particular one reduced their spending. So it threw this one up. What Ryan's then saying is, okay, that ranking on the far right, as he's coming down to that $99,000 cut, then move them to a.
It moved them to a 4. We took them to 4s in school administration and district.
We didn't need a bottom up have 1.
But
That's not cool.
so, and know this. So here's what their new number comes in as at 21. So I know what the numbers are over here, so I can tell you that. But let's go back to the top. The district that we started with 6 years ago was Belle Plaine. That was a district that had to cut over $1 million in that year. The number there was in the 30s. Now they were a 17 in fiscal year 18, and they're a 16 in fiscal year 19. Settled contracts, 3 meetings, 4 meetings, 2 times ago, 3 meetings last time with staff. Staff walks through this process. They can see where they are in comparison. And the truth is, when you go into negotiations, staff don't want to see a bunch of staff get cut either. And they also understand. So, they take a fair settlement, but they don't take an enormous settlement. And in their next contract negotiations, they're going to be able to do better because they have some stability now over a period of time. But really what you want to get is a low score. So this got them to a 4, partly because sometimes it works out where you don't have a lot of positions. So you cut one position, it's 99,868. So it gets you to a 4. You just in the end need that rank score at the bottom to get an alignment. So they become a 21 when we make all of these adjustments. So they had to reduce from 555,074 in school administration down to 426,500. So they had to cut 128,574. Sorry, that would be a principal level position, most likely, and maybe some clerical. They were overspending in regular instruction by 358,000. Instructional support, we just took about 8,000. That got them to 2s in these areas. So they were a 4, a 2, a 2. Operational maintenance, they were overspending by about 20,000. I'm sorry, what they could afford to spend was 820,570. They had to cut 134,000. What we found there is we did a review of custodial staff. They had about 100,000 square feet less in buildings than Belle Plaine did, and they had 2 more custodial staff than Belle Plaine. So that's where we got down into the staff numbers of knowing they had more staffing to clean less space than Belle Plaine did. And then transportation, they were already one of the better ones. They were a 3. It ended up working out fine where they ended up at 3 here. So actually you can see those rank orders here. These reductions, which totaled 729,036, gave them a 4, 4, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2 to get them to a 21, which is the second lowest ranked score here. So now they're right sized. Then what they did is they passed a referendum, $640 a pupil, which translated to $730-some thousand. What we provided for them then was a narrative where we actually so they said one of the things they promised the community was smaller class sizes. So in order to support that, we had to put 247,000 roughly into instructional support to make sure to do that. But now the community could see, here's where 247,000 of our referendum money was going to make sure our class sizes stayed small. And then there was another portion of money they put, I don't have that sheet up, but it's a narrative where it walks through each of these and shows what are the reductions that they made in each of the areas, and also how much levy money were they putting in to support each of these areas. So the community can look at it in a very transparent way and say, yep, makes sense. This is how we're spending our money. And then every year, this is the process now for Central that will drive their budget. So when they sit down to look at their budget, they're going to look at these ranked scores and their audited numbers. So in fiscal year 20, when that comes out, they're going to look at where they were, and they're going to make sure they have no 5s, 6s, or 7s on here because they want to be right sized. Just one other analogy, because everybody often talks about Edina public schools. Everybody knows Edina and talks about it. When you put Edina into my comparison model like this, you will actually see that they spend the least amount in district administration, school administration, operational maintenance, transportation. They're all low in those areas. Where they're high, instructional support and pupil support. And that's a district that you never hear about making cuts. you know, and everybody thinks they just have all this money, but they're very efficiently run. Like, it's surprising to me the low amounts of money they spend in a lot of those buckets. And so what I do is I go around and I think of the districts I know in the state that are well run. And when you plug them into this model, districts you never hear about having to go out for cuts. And this is based on per pupil. So it's not about all the, like Wayzata has a ton of referendum money coming in. It still gets divided out by pupils. So what we build it off of is the per pupil score. So you can compare small districts to large, because we're looking at, based on your 4,000 students, how much are you spending per pupil in each of these 7 areas? So this is what I've been working with Jeff on. I gave him some snapshots of it, I know, as you came into the referendum, but it's some of what I'm gonna work with him on going forward, just as a process. So when you build a budget, there's a structure for how you build your budget, and it looks at what are the other districts like you, how are they spending your money? So you're not just sitting down in a room saying, well, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. We're gonna do this in comparison to our comparable districts. So.
The key thing to remember, like Ryan mentioned, Bell playing
To the power play.
was looking at a couple hundred, I think it was 110,000 square feet of building. And they were spending 120,000 more. Well, so that gets us started. The model gets us started. Then we delve into that expenditure piece. On that, we said, okay, you need to come in with 3 summer workers. You need to do this, this, and this. Or you can do, so there were 3 solutions developed. Come in to this $120,000 change. On the operations side, because the operations manager down there is a phenomenal guy. And he really does good work. But we laid out that his choice. He said, yeah, I can see that, I can do that. I like it. The pitchfork scenario we were talking about was, I drove that thing. And we're the only car in the lot, on the side lot. Everybody knows, I've been down there enough, everybody knows my vehicle. I thought with 54 angry faculty people, we were going to have maybe a fire smash or something like that. We went from a $4 million fund balance down to under 1 in 2.5 years. And I'm telling you, 45 minutes later after this presentation, they were hugging them. They couldn't believe what they saw. They really liked it. And I think what they got out of it is, or they were mumbling back, is we can sustain this budget. We know where things are at. It was a really neat situation. And we don't track this out and help you do this as well as other businesses we're working on, because I think that's the name of the game of these times. The money's scarce. We just got to become more efficient on your side of the equation, and that'll translate to what we get from the state.
Any questions? I know it's a lot to comprehend. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
How do you, on your graph with all the different comparisons, there was the input, what you could afford, what the district could afford. How do you figure that number?
Hold on, I'm going to go back.
Is it a top secret equation?
Oh, we made that super tiny because if you go big word, but when you saw that, you'll see a purple line and a red line there. So that red and purple say, hey, are you a high spending district? Are you medium? Are you low? So if you're low producing revenue district, you can't be a high expenditure district.
I want to know the input afford level. How do you know that?
This, you're looking right here.
Yes.
Okay, so what we do is we examine this number here. So we're looking at a 31 and saying, okay, you have no, at this point they had no levy in place. They had only, well, actually 724 adjusted to 731. But this is what we're looking at. So they had a low amount of money, no excess, and you're a 31. Like you can't be a 31. This is where their financial problems were coming. Yeah, and tell the peer, yeah, read that, Ryan. Yeah. Tell them the peers are. So we can't see what you're pointing at here.
Yeah. Can you open up that?
Oh, yeah. Go back.
They can't see it over there.
Sorry. So, and so when we go to the input level, so yeah, so we have the pupil spending here and we rank it as a 31. And what we come to over here is, I sat down with the superintendent, we had a conversation here. You see, like I said, now, ideally, because there are 724, you want all these to be ones. But you also don't need to be a 7 because your lowest score here is well played to 17. So we want to be
responsible and make sure we don't disrupt the culture. One of the things Mike talks about, the district he was referring to, there were 54 teachers sitting there, and we cut $354,000 out of teaching staff. And they still were happy at the end because they saw what we made cuts in district administration, school administration, all those areas. What we do here is we sit down and we say, okay, what we can afford, we need this score here at the bottom. So we look at all 7 areas. We need this score at the bottom to be closest to this because they have 724, we have 724. We're going to be right sized before we put our levy dollars in. We need to be as close to this as possible. So then what we do is we go through and I have a sheet where you would have all these districts. You have what are the superintendents made? What other district office positions are there? What has been coded to school administration? Another thing we find here is a lot of coding errors where districts have coded things wrong. We straighten all that out and balance it out. And then I work with the superintendent to say, okay, here we can cut $99,000. Maybe we had a curriculum director position. This is not what they did. I know what they did, but I'll keep that out of play right now. But let's say we had a curriculum director position who left, and I'm not going to replace that. And this is $99,868 for salary and benefits. Now that only gets us to a 4, but it's easy because it's a position we just don't have to replace. We don't have to let anybody else go. And then we went down to school administration. We looked and said, well, maybe they have one more principal than their comparable districts. And maybe the total compensation, salary, benefits for that principal was 128. That's what we got for. We look at regular instruction. When we look at there, what kind of models do you have? You have a 7-period day, a 6-period day, a 4-period block. We look at your elementary schedule. We look at all positions that are available. We also look at revenue options. Access. I think you guys use Access here.
You don't know what we're talking about.
You don't, but you are. So Access is some money that comes back from the state. Are there grant opportunities out there that can go towards offsetting this cut or reduction? So here we looked at, they were staffing some positions. They're actually doing an online Spanish. So they had a Spanish teacher leave. They consulted and got an online Spanish program, which cost like $15,000. But the Spanish teaching position was like $70,000. So that's some of what's in the 358. So I worked with the superintendent, and we go through each of these areas and look at all the positions that all these districts have in each of these 7 areas. Like I highlighted, I think here, operational maintenance. They had 2 more.
I understand what you're saying. I just want to know how you know what the district can afford.
Oh,
Like each, the input afford level, that column, how do you know that?
So what I do is we put in here, so we put this position in here and we say they left. We know this got us a 4. A 4, so this number changes as we adjust this field right here. So when we came up with the 98, what we had to do was, at the end, you want this number to be as close to 17 as possible. So some of these started, like in here, we probably started at, well, $4,105,000 if you look at regular instruction.
So you're saying you can change that number so that your overall is 21.
That piece of it, for Ryan and I, we start our goal setting right there.
Okay.
We start the initial process of, okay, here's the area, here's what we think we could be, and well, this is reasonable.
Well, I wouldn't let me
start
type.
with. And then what he was talking about, that exploration starts.
Okay.
We rip the Band-Aid off.
Yep.
And we say, okay, in this bucket, what are the contracts look like? What are the number of people? What's the curriculum look like? That deep dive to say, now, can we bring you something that says, okay, here is a different way of looking at this budget, it's a different way to put it back together, and is this acceptable?
The only spot on this spreadsheet where you can type anything in so it foolproofs it is what I say, so it doesn't get messed up, is in this column.
Okay, so that one can change.
That is the only one.
Okay.
If I want to adjust the districts or anything, I have to go over to my other tabs over here, like the specific district information. What drives this orange box right here is this district info. Whatever district is here is the first district, so that's central.
Yep.
The rest of them go into this compare. The only thing you do so this is where I sit with the superintendent and we manipulate this column. And it's estimating, like why is this 494,500? Because I estimated it that. But we knew that we had a position here. This was the dollar allotment. Because we did talk a long time about, well, it's a 4. So then what we did is we went through all of them to figure out where we were over. And the first time our number here was like a 29. So we had to go back up into here, like I said, and make additional changes until we got this number to a point where you're right-sized. But those decisions are all made based on what positions there are in each of these other districts in all these areas.
Okay.
So it's not you're just deciding, well, I want 2 less custodians. What's your rationale? Because I can look at 6 other districts, look at what their square footage is, and divide out by a person how much square footage that person cleaned, and know if I have too much maintenance.
Well,
Okay.
We don't want to be in a position where, what's your favorite program here at the school?
Yeah.
We're not gonna touch it. What's your favorite program at school? We're not gonna touch it. We want to have something that's fact-based, big picture, down to fact-based, and say, look, here's what we think is the best interest, and this is where we think you can run an efficient, effective programming, and people are gonna want to come here.
So that first district, I'll give you an example. They're a small district, about 1,000 students. They had band, choir, and orchestra. I worked in a district at one time that had 2,250 kids in the high school that had band, choir, and barely could support an orchestra. But, so what was that, when I talked about the throwing noodles against the wall and deciding what we're gonna have to change? Music kept getting talked about. In this model, you don't have to talk about music. We're talking, we examined what the other districts had. They had a 4-period day. Nobody else did. Now, are they gonna lose elective opportunities? Yeah, you lose 25% of them. Because kids go down from getting 60 choices to 48 choices. So over the course of 4 years, they get less choices of electives, but you can still keep band, choir, and orchestra. You just have to run a 7-period day when you do that. So that was the thing I think that they would say that they respected about the model. Oh, I'm sorry. That was something I think they would say that they respected about the model, was that it wasn't isolating programs. Like I say this, we've got, in that case, you got $16 million you can spend. You can only spend $1 one way, but you can spend it multiple different ways. What is it we want to keep? Well, it made sense to them to say, well, if everybody else is on a 7-period day, we should be. And when they went to a 7-period day, they were able to keep all 3 musics. So that's where I think it made sense to staff, because that was what was amazing to me too when I talked to Mike, was we presented cutting $350,000 out of teaching staff that night, and they were okay with it because they could see why. They could see, getting back to Jeff's thing, they could see the why. So, other questions? Awesome. Well, we'll have more in the future, and we'll actually be able to show you yours. At some point here, I'll share it with Jeff too, and we can come back and go through what it looks like. But
I'd like to stay up here because we're going to jump
All
to
right.
the next section. So,
present mode, sorry.
that's okay. Yeah, switch over here. Okay.
There we go. I'm gonna keep my 6-foot distance from you too.
I'm good.
Well, thank you. I think it's amazing how you could take literally every school district in the state of Minnesota, you dump them into a spreadsheet, so they go through and they have every audit from every district in the state of Minnesota. And at really the click of a button, you can turn any district on in the state and pair that up with GFW, and we can start dissecting that and figuring out really options for what we could make changes. And like you said, rather than making staff certain reductions, you're able to do some scheduling, which was a different option than maybe some other things which had more appeal to the community.
And it stabilizes you. It gives you actually a roadmap or a structure of which you're building your budget based on comparables. Instead of every school district I had ever been in, we just built the budget based on what we thought we should do.
My dad was superintendent of schools in Cambridge, Sandy, 2 years as assistant, 23 years as superintendent. He's the only superintendent in the state to survive the strike. We almost ended up north of the U.S. My mom's, she was offered the Hutch job. And I said, hey, I want to play football for Cambridge, Sandy, and we didn't move much on the tournament that year. And we did end up winning it 2 years later while I was a senior. But what my father always said was what made him a successful superintendent was having a firm grasp and a firm hold on a consolidated district was the finance. He said, everybody knows what's going on. We have a plan. And at that point in time, he had a 20-year plan for growing the elementaries and middle schools and eventually the money in a referendum was spent for the high school. The second piece was transportation. So transportation, as long as I get the kids to and from safely and have he had a phenomenal transportation director for all those years. And then when he retired, he got a second one. And that was his second reason for longevity. And then, of course, his third one was he always joked in a winning football program. So back then, that was real important. Now we need to win it all sports. Yeah. That financial piece, as Ryan's saying, is such an important building block because it's the one area that you as a board, you as a superintendent, you as administration, you don't have to worry about. And if you can get that worry done free and clear, it frees you up for all the other good work you can do. And that's what leads us to this.
All right. So we, when I first started, the conversation was, is GFW going to be here in X amount of years? That was a real question and a real concern in our community. That is not a concern that we have right now. Through the efficiencies we've made with the budget, through the support of our community, through the operating levy, and I'll ask Mr. Hoheisel and Dr. Lager this question right now, and they can answer it however you want. Given what we're looking at, both in the efficiencies we're making and what you've seen with the OBA model, are we in a position where we need to worry about dissolution and consolidation and be really worried about those things?
No, and the reason I can tell you that is in your comparisons, there's actually 2 or 3 districts that have less students than you do, and they're functioning as districts. And what's really interesting in the OBA model, because I have done it for your district already, Martin County West in fiscal year 18, their ADM was 724 and GFW's was 724. But when you go to that bottom expenditure line, GFW spent $500,000 more than Martin County West did. And you'll be able to see in there, but there's a $500,000. And at 724 students and 724 board approved referendum, you had the same money, but spent $500,000 more. And then in fiscal year 19, you'll look at, I think GFW is like 4 students less than Martin County West. Like they're at like 727 and you're 723 or 722, if I remember off the top of my head. And again, there's another 500,000 of too much. And that's where I think the million would have come into play, except for some of the efficiencies that Jeff and them were able to find. But from that standpoint, you're the same size district as Martin County West, and they're existing and functioning. And when you look at the OBA model, I think there's 2, maybe 3 other districts on there that are actually have less students. One of those districts, though, will have a number in the teens in that rank order. So you'll see per pupil where they're spending money in comparison to GFW. But from that standpoint, when I look at the OBA model, you're regionally, are you the second largest?
Third, well, if you take every one of your neighbors, you're the 3rd largest of any neighbor you talk.
The third largest of any. So from that standpoint, Jeff, I would say
Third largest
no.
number of people served.
Yeah.
So I take a different take on it. So we consolidated Tri-City United a number of years ago, which is Montgomery, Lonsdale, with Sewell.
The center.
The center, yes.
And
Seward County. We talked about the Seward County COVID for how we So why did we take an 800 and a 1,200 kid school district and consolidate them? Because they wanted to compete programmatically and athletically with their neighbors in that arena. So I don't look at consolidation as maybe the last resort. We did consolidation to form a super district where we could offer everything to the constituents of those communities. So I know it's a different mindset because as we move west and south and northwest, we talk about consolidation and it usually is in the form of dissolution or, oh my goodness, we're hemorrhaging with loss of kids or bad connotation. I would say if you ever were to talk consolidation, you would be wanting to do it because you want to take advantage of offering the most programs to the most amount of kids in your area. And you would be ripe and primed to do that. if we really thought outside the box and brought a number of districts together. But that's I think, as we've seen COVID and we've seen how you, the district, are the hub of all the activities in the community, I think we'll be readjusting education for the next 10 years in many different ways because of what's been happening in the last 9 months. And we're going to come up with some good ideas. We're going to see some things work. And I apologize, I was on another board meeting up in Bagley, Minnesota. The first 45 minutes was them saying, we are still on distance learning model, and what can we do to get out of it? That's a pretty pathetic way to have to run your board meeting. And it's sad because it's time loading. Look what we're able to talk about. What can we do now that we're on the pathway to taking care of our operational problem, moving away from SOD, what else can we get done? I'm much better at talking about distance learning and how kids are threatening to all leave our elementary school and go elsewhere.
So we no longer asking the question if we're going to be here or not. Our question is, who are we? Why GFW? And that's where the strategic planning piece comes in. In order to do that well and sustain it, we have to take care of our budget first. We told the community, if you help us out with this, we're going to do our part, and that's what the OBA is going to do. It's going to fulfill that promise to our community. The next piece is working with our community to develop our why, to develop our plan. Gail Gilman from the Minnesota School Board Association, she's the Director of Strategic Planning and Board Leadership. She was unavailable to come tonight. She's actually at a different board meeting. But we have been working with MSBA to gain information. The Minnesota School Board Association, for our community members, this is our state association that supports our school board members and supports superintendents and school districts in order to go through strategic planning and do all the things that we need to do as a district. They help with policy writing and all sorts of great things. This is just a quick overview, and I know our board members have worked with the Minnesota School Board Association, but I wanted to just reshare this for our community so they could see this, and it has to do a little bit with the governance model. The school board's role is to govern, and the strategic plan is that vision. It's where are we going as a district. It's a roadmap.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that.
That's okay. A strategic plan helps us keep our focus when times are tough. When we want to take a look at that OBA model and say where are our priorities and we're working within those categories, a strategic plan can help us determine where our priorities are. And we do that through board action, through board input, through staff and student input, through community input. And then we revisit it on a regular basis, and the board and superintendents can set goals around that plan.
So what is a strategic plan, and why am I talking about it? One of the things that I've been a part of a number of different processes, work with Teamworks International, a variety of groups that work with schools, and one of the things that Jeff and I were visiting about this is a lot of districts sit down and start strategic planning, and it's all what their hopes and dreams are, but then they can't actually fund what they want to do. So I always say that the OBA model or the financial piece is the foundation to what the plan is. You don't want to put a plan out there for your community and get everybody excited if you know that you can't afford it. So the baseline and the foundation is the OBA model. Like, as much as we don't want it to be about finances, you have to have the finances to make sure that when people come up with what their dream is or what their why is, you can deliver on it. So really what it is, and Jeff just talked about, it's a process that guides your work. It has to be rooted in financial stability. And it provides benchmarks that can be reviewed on a yearly basis, typically, in a board retreat, that really drives the work. I always say a strategic plan needs to be worth more than the paper it's written on, because a lot of them aren't. You got to be able to sit there and say, at the end of the day, if we do all these things, are we better as a district? And if you can't answer that question, crumple it up and throw it in the garbage and start over again.
Our community needs something very specific to us. It is not. There are just some kind of canned approaches you can kind of go through for strategic planning, and they kind of hit the standard pieces. But after doing our listening tour, after looking at our budget and where our community needs are and how they're feeling, we need a more customized approach to really get our community voice and to show them that we're going to be responsible with those dollars, to show them that we want to set targets and goals and we want to be accountable, and we're going to show them how we're achieving those goals. And if we don't, we're going to say, you know what, here's how we're going to adjust if we didn't make it in order to move forward. And this is how we're going to do that with you. The benefits of the strategic plan, they meet the legal requirements. They build board team relationships. They create expectations for operations, and they work on that continual pursuit of excellence and continuous improvement. Other things it does is allows us to monitor and evaluate how we're doing. Strategic plans, usually a good strategic plan, in my opinion, usually has about 3 to 5 goals. And then underneath of that, you have plans on to achieve that. The Minnesota School Board Association would tell you that. I think Dr. Lager would tell you that. I would tell you that. These are independent people coming from different areas, all saying that, you know, if you have more than that, you can't focus on anything because there's just too much. So we have to figure out where our priorities are. What are the things that we're doing well that we want to continue to do well? And what are those areas that we need to get better at? It allows the board to speak for the community. This process involves the community. And so as we are trying to make decisions, we know that this plan has that input from the community. We can go back and visit that and also update and tweak it as we go to ensure that we're meeting their priorities. And sometimes new priorities come in and people have this new idea. Well, does it fit into our strategic plan? Yes or no? If it doesn't, do we need to adjust our plan? Do we want to do that? And if we're going to do that, then what's going to go? Because we can't focus on everything. It really aligns our community values with the district operation. And I think when we talk about that why, that's that feeling that we get. When we think about GFW, some of us get really excited. We just think, God, I just love being a Thunderbird, right? That's that limbic system response. That's that why. I'm going to look at Mr. Warner right now. I'm going to pick on you for a second because you're just right here. But, I mean, this guy is a why. I mean, it is amazing. The passion that I've seen from Mr. Warner from the moment I first met him for GFW is just amazing. And, you know, we want to build that in all of our community members. That's awesome.
Thank you, Mr. Ward.
Absolutely. Thanks for letting me pick on you.
No problem.
We also have state mandates and federal mandates, and those often show up in things like our World's Best Workforce. And our strategic plan, when we're done, will meet all the requirements of that. And so when we have our annual meetings and when we have our data reviews, we'll be meeting all the state and federal requirements through the plan that we've developed. I showed this graph up here. This is the board governance model. And for our community, I thought that this might be helpful to see, you know, what is the role of the school board? What is the role of the superintendent? My listening tour, there's a lot of confusion about people thinking about what do these different groups do? And I know our board members have gone through board training or worked with MSBA and been doing this for a while. So this is probably a review for all of you. Up at the top in the red, you can see this is the school board does. The board hires a superintendent, evaluates, establishes expectations, parameters, the strategic planning piece. This is all board level work. They develop policies. They approve a budget, approve contracts. Those are things that the school board does. At my level, then, what I do is I monitor that plan. I ensure that the plan that you've come up with is going to be implemented to fidelity, meaning that we know that not only are we seeing the outcomes, but we've implemented it well. All that fidelity data. We work with the policies. We hire the staff and develop the procedures to make these things happen. We implement policies. So those are things that would fall under my umbrella. And then I work with our cabinet, who are the leaders in different departments in our district, who then go out to their teams and are doing those different pieces. So that's just kind of a quick snapshot of how that works. So in the end, a strategic plan often has something like a belief statement, like a why. Not all of them have that, but many do. There's a vision, there's a mission, there's goals and objectives. Dr. Lager is going to talk a little bit about that process as we go. And we really felt that for GFW, we have to marry the budget piece and we have to marry the strategic planning piece together. Kind of like you had said, you can't, if we can come up with this great plan, it can look really wonderful on paper, but if we can only have the financial ability to support it, to sustain it over time, then we're going to fall short of what we promised to deliver on. We don't want to do that. We want to have a balance, we want a budget that is sustainable and goals that we can achieve. This is me.
Yeah, you're still going.
Okay, I thought you were going to start. Goals, so we want to have goals, we want to have direction with this, we want to have, we want to be working with the end in mind. So everything should tie back to this plan. So at a cabinet level, we may have a 3-year plan tied around each of the areas that the board has. If you identify 3 to 5 areas, each of our departments or under each of those areas, we might have a 3-year plan on how we're going to phase in and implement these things over time. And we set our budget to this. We plan 2 to 3 years out so we can achieve our goals and can report back on that based on what that strategic plan and what the direction of the board. Thanks. Yep. And overall, it follows a process. And this is where Dr. Lager is going to talk a little bit about process, about that collection of data, working with focus groups, equity tools, doing meetings and surveys and planning, coming up with an action plan, and then also monitoring and updating that plan as we go over time. Once you're done with the strategic plan, it doesn't just go onto a shelf and sit there. It should be a living document. We should be revisiting it. We should be bringing it back to the board, talking to you about how we're meeting the direction that you've set for us, and if we are not, how we need to make adjustments or pass through policies or work with you to help that happen. So that's all part of the strategic planning process, and Dr. Lager's will go a little deeper with it.
Yeah, and for me, the one thing I think I want to reiterate is keep it simple. Like, you don't want the plan to be too robust. You don't want too much in there. You actually want it to be something that drives your organization. Hopefully I have an opportunity to talk a little bit about what that should look like. So who's involved in the process? You know, as I talked with Jeff, I've been through a number of processes. I've been through where we've had 74 strategic directions. We've looked at the plan and said we could do all these things, but I can't tell you we're going to be any better in the end. So you really want it to be concise, simple, and linear. And really how the process starts is you want to identify stakeholders, you know, superintendent, district leadership, parents, teachers, community members, students, members of your workforce. You know, a lot of what we talk about right here, districts talking about is career and technical education is a huge piece. How do we find a way to connect with the local workforce to make sure they have a voice at the table? And then it's important to know where you're going before you start planning how you're going to get there. So one of the things in the OBA model we talked about too is we'll be able to look at all these things. You know, I worked with a district where the #1 conversation in the community was all our kids are leaving. So we looked at the 7, and when I laughed and I said, all kids are leaving every district. In fact, I just heard the other day in the state of Minnesota, every district in northern Minnesota, I'm not sure where they draw the line, is down kids this year. There's only one district, Tower, has 60 kids in it, typically, and they have 61 this year. They're the only one that's up a student. But this district actually had the second best capture rate out of the 7 districts that were comparable to them in the OBA model. But because 10 kids left, their community assumed they had a problem with all these kids leaving. Like, you got to actually know where you are. And I use Stillwater as an example. Stillwater is seen as a high-performing district, nice place to visit. Why wouldn't you want to go there? Stillwater lost at the time I was there 31% of their students to other schools. And when you tell people that, they're like, what? You know, where a lot of districts will lose 8 to 10%, but there's a lot of options. So you want to know where you are. So these are some key areas that I think you just look at, go through the superintendent, make sure the board, the leadership team are aware of them, because there are messages that the community you'll want the community to understand. Vision and mission statements, I think, are important to me. They aren't the core to what I would say is a part of the strategic plan. Some people would argue that, but vision is something that we're working towards and you're never able to achieve. If you ever achieve your vision, you didn't set it high enough. So, you know, we're going to produce the greatest members of the workforce in all career, technical and professional careers. You know, that encompasses moving students in all different pathways. The mission is something that's a little bit more direct. It focuses more kind of on the day-to-day, and the mission is something that you can achieve, you know, to provide high quality industry standard education that prepares our students, and these are just samples, to enter the workforce, 2-year college and training programs or colleges, I can't read what's over here, whatever, resulting in students finding something that they love. You know, so I spend a lot more time, like we're working with districts, saying, you know, the mission is really about what we're focused on, that we're trying to achieve each year. And when Jeff talked about belief statements, I'm kind of a believer in one, but maybe not a whole lot more, because you don't want a bunch of language in this plan. You want this plan to actually drive you. And, you know, in the district that has a vision and a mission very similar to this, their belief statement is, we believe every kid has a skill, a talent, and a passion that they can build a life on. And what I hear that district talk more about is the skill, talent, and passion that a kid can build a life on, because that encompasses the kid that wants to be an electrician. It encompasses the kid that wants to operate heavy machinery. It encompasses the kid that wants to be a farmer. It encompasses the kid that wants to be an engineer. He has a skill, a talent, a passion they can build life on. The mission is what we're going to do. We're going to provide high quality industry standard education that's going to allow him to get to the workforce. So if that kid wants to go into a career at Cambria and needs drafting, we want to make sure that we're preparing him using SolidWorks and not Inventor in terms of the software, because SolidWorks is the industry standard. So the mission, that's how it is driving our decision making. We might have Inventor because that was cheap, but we know that if a kid's going to go work at Cambria, he has to be trained in SolidWorks. And that's what every machine shop in Minnesota and across the country, we're going to buy SolidWorks because we believe every kid has a skill, a talent, a passion that they can build life on. And our mission tells us it has to be industry standard. So that's how I'm talking about strategic plan actually helps you make decisions about what you're doing. This is just, again, a couple things that define what it is. This is more about when you're actually putting it together. These are questions that you consider and the process that you go through in doing it. And really the mission and vision process is one that starts with the superintendent and school board. You know, superintendent's got a listening tour. He's collected a ton of feedback. He's going to share that feedback with the board. And then what happens is the board and the superintendent go through a process where you develop what that mission and vision are. And then when you have a draft of those, then you find a way to put it out to the community and allow the community to weigh in on it. What are their thoughts? What are some ideas they have? And there's a couple different tools that you can do that, you know, through, you can use blog. You can use a program called Thought Exchange where everybody can add a thought underneath and then everybody can vote on the thought that they like. They can give it a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I really like this idea or I don't. It's a really good way to collect feedback. It is a tool. You actually have to purchase it to use it, but I worked with a district in southern Minnesota where they were actually able to create the same thing using a blog type situation where people were able to weigh in. But really this is work where you talk a lot about what you want in the listening tour, what you learned in the listening tour, what you know. All of you share what you know about your community, and then you go through individually and write some sample statements or key phrases. Then you share them out collectively and you look for the common themes. And out of those common themes, you'll start to develop and you'll write a sample of what's a vision statement. And then you'll talk through what that is and you'll revise it. And then that's your draft. And then you do the same thing for the mission statement. Then you take it out to the community. Simplistic process, but it takes feedback and input. So this talks a little bit about what that was. Sorry, a little bit of review, rewrite, and then get it out to the community. And then you get stakeholder feedback. I talked about Thought Exchange a little bit. There's different ways to do that. You repeat the same process then for mission. So really that vision and mission work starts based on what Jeff's learned through that listening tour, what you all know as board members about what's important to your community. And then you go through a process because you're the leaders of the district. You're the ones setting the mission and the vision of what this school district's going to become. But you want then your community to weigh in on how you see what that looks like. Then we get into a simple area of forming strategic directions. And I think Jeff said this, no more than 3 to 5. I think 4 is a great number, but these really should drive your work. And as I've told Jeff, ultimately, these become the evaluation of the superintendent. You know, each of these 5 areas or 4 areas, whatever it is. And again, there's a process. And for this process, you're going to involve all of those other key stakeholders that I had back here. District leadership, teachers, superintendent, all of those. And how this starts is based on all the information that Jeff has learned. What we want is someone to facilitate that process. So I could work as a facilitator with Jeff in this. And what I want Jeff to do is come up with what are his 3 to 5 things that he's learned through talking to the community. And then what we want to do is we're going to go to the district leadership team and we're going to work through a process. And I'm going to talk about that process here where they weigh in on what do they think the 3 to 5 are. And they individually do it. We put them up on a board and they each get 3 dots. They get to rank what those are. But what we're looking for here is how closely does the district's leadership team think the priorities they have relate to what Jeff thinks they are from what he's learned from the community. But what you want there is alignment. Because if Jeff thinks it's these 4 things and the leadership team thinks it's 4 completely different things, you've already got a problem there where there's clearly not an understanding between what leadership thinks should be happening versus the superintendent and what the superintendent's heard from the community. And then when I say keep the process simple, we do this same process for each of those groups, your workforce, your parents, your teachers, your students. Each of them come up in small focus groups. They write down what are those 3 to 5 things they think are important. We put them up on a paper, look for common themes. They get 3 dots. They get to rank all of them. then the 3 to 5 that get the most are what come out of that group as the priorities. Then what we do is I call it leveling up. We bring it back to the other group. So if we did superintendent, then we're going to do district leadership team. Superintendent's going to get with the district leadership team. We hope we have alignment there. Then we're going to go to our staff. Then that will level back up to district leadership team. Does the staff see the same priorities as the leadership team to the superintendent? We hope we still have alignment there. Then we go to parents. And what we're looking for is where are those gaps as you level it up back to the group, and then everybody gets shared out through the process what each of the group's priorities were, so there's transparency in what that is. But what you're working towards is trying to get alignment between each of those groups as you level the information back up. So that was a little bit, I skipped or went through this slide about leveling up, but each of those work through the same process, simple, concise. We really focus on what it is we believe in. And then, so some examples of that. So now we get, let's say we get our areas, and our areas come back to being these: personalized learning, early learning initiatives, academic performance, student involvement, quality instruction. Let's say that through all of those groups, these are the 5 that emerge as priorities for our parents, our workforce, our staff, all of them. Then what Jeff does is he goes to personalized learning. He goes to the technology guy and says, okay, personalized learning is important to our community. And you kind of gave this example earlier. In order to do that, we have to give every kid a device, because giving a kid a device gives them unlimited access to information. Barring anything else, they can get any question they have, they can go out and find it on Google. So that giving them a device is important. But then so your responsibility is to help lead the personalization of this through technology. So you come to Jeff and say, but we have 35 kids that don't have internet access at home. How do we get that?
24.
24 you have, okay. 24 that don't have internet access home. Then we look at, okay, what's the best LMS out there to facilitate this? Because if you have a curriculum director or one of your principals is assigned to it, then the curriculum person is, we want all of our course content to be digital, but we don't want to lose any level of academic performance. So now that person has to work with you to get that curriculum piece tied back to technology. And that becomes one of Jeff's goals that are personalized learning. So the board at the end of the year sits down and personalized learning is an area that was decided on in the retreat. Jeff is going to talk about qualitative and quantitative information. Here's what we did around personalized learning. Every kid got a device. Every kid has internet access. We're using Schoology as an LMS. We're using Seesaw at the elementary level. Then the curriculum person is going to come in and talk about, we're doing balanced literacy, and we're using Spelling City, Vocabulary City, Epic. So kids have choices of 2,000 to 5,000. So they can walk through what are, so as a board, you get a clear understanding of personalized learning and what it looked like, and what was the technology person's role, what was the curriculum or principal's role potentially in that. Well, how did this change what we did instructionally for the teachers? So that would be an example of that from technology. Go ahead, yeah, and I won't go into the 6-year plan. That's a whole different, but that's where I would start with that. Go ahead.
And I want to connect it back to the OBA for a second, because if we're taking a look at our budget, in order to do this and do the personalized learning example, we need to make sure that we have a replacement schedule for our devices as they age out. We have to make sure we don't just do a one-time money investment. So if we just take one-time dollars and throw them at a bunch of Chromebooks and get them from everybody, but we're not putting money away, we're cycling through a fifth of our Chromebooks every year, every 4 years, I think, then our devices are going to be bad in 5 years. That's not a sustainable plan. So when we right-size the budget, that needs to be a consideration. When we think about implementation of strategies, we are starting continuous improvement teams at our building level. They're going to look at student data, identify evidence-based practices, and help us determine what strategies need to be done. So how are we staffed appropriately for that? And then, like I mentioned with that safety walkthrough tool, how we're going to collect data on how safe our schools look, you would do something similar around personalized learning. So when I walk into a classroom and I'm in Mr. Werner's classroom and he's teaching, I should be able to walk in and there should be components that I see just through a walkthrough that these things are happening, and we're going to collect it. It's called a practice profile. It's part of implementation science and fidelity checks, which means, are we doing what we said we're going to do? We said we're going to do personalized learning. So what does that look like when I walk in Mr. Werner's room? I'm going to go check yes, 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 no, yes. We compile that across every teacher on multiple walkthroughs across the entire school. The teachers look at that data and we say, okay, as a school system, where do we need to make adjustments? And that cycles back into the OBA process. We tie that back to our strategic plan. it all interrelates together, but we have to have that solid plan in place in order to do those other components.
Well, it's a great example, actually. We talked back to the OBA model of the district. I said that's got $800,000 right now they're looking at. They actually they were able to negotiate and save $100,000. They had mini iPads and they went to full-size iPads and saved $100,000 a year on the lease. So through OBA, they were actually able to build that in. They have $750,000 set aside to be able to, they can either fully replace and then buy their iPads for their next 4 years, which frees up $265,000 more in their general operating budget every year, or they'll continue to put away $200,000 for the next 4. So every year they'll have the option, or every cycle at the end of the 4 years they're cycling out to either buy them or not. An OBA process helped them get there, which supported the personalized learning piece of what we're talking about here. So I just did one of those areas. One student involvement in activities. Another district worked with the district 7 miles down the road. They had one sport and everybody was frustrated and didn't like that sport. They thought they should break them up and everything else. And superintendents got together and worked on it. And instead of having one sport, they now have 6 opportunities between the 2 districts. They have boys and girls soccer, which they never would have been able to support individually by themselves. They have Nordic skiing, which they never would have been able to support by themselves. They have a bass fishing club, or bass fishing is I actually learned kids can earn like $10,000 scholarships if they win that contest. They partner on that. They have mountain biking, but they have so many more. They have bowling. They have so many more kids that are in the fold that wouldn't have been, that are answering that strategic direction of student involvement and activities because they're partnering with that neighboring district. And that's a little bit the consolidation conversation. You don't have to consolidate. How can we work together and partner and do things together as districts and still have our own identity and meet our own districts? So with that, like I said, I like to keep it simple and linear. There's work that goes into it, but the process is the same and repetitive. It's narrow, it's easier to understand. A lot of strategic planning processes I've been in, my head spins for the whole thing because there's so much stuff going on, you can't really figure out where you're trying to get to. I really think it's important that everybody understands and the information levels up, and then that the plan, you can clearly see how the plan is driving the work of our district. Ultimately, it becomes the superintendent's goals. If the superintendent, it's what he gives to the people on his cabinet and under that he supervises to be able to answer those questions. Other questions, sorry, ideas? Yeah.
What is the timeline on the strategic process?
I can answer that. Go ahead. So we want to make sure that we time things up well. So we are looking at completing, and Gail wasn't able to be here today for the Minnesota School Board Association. You'll see her involved in the process as well. Our plan is to try to line something up for late winter, early spring, like end of February, March time. The reason why we want to do that is because we start setting our budgets at those times, and we want to make sure that we have identified our strategic plan. So then when we move into the budget season, we can set our budget to the strategic plan and get our staffing in place so we know what we're doing before we leave at the end of the school year to be in place for next year. We don't want to be figuring this out, in August. We want to get this done ahead of time. So we'd be looking for in March-ish area, depending on the process. And I think, in terms of individualizing this, there's a lot of different tools, and Dr. Lager talked about different tools, and the school board has a bunch of different tools. What I really learned is that we have to get out and talk to people, and we can do some surveys, we can do some things out. Going out to farms, going out to businesses, we sit down with small groups of people. I found that's where I got some of the most valuable data. The other data is great, but sometimes, just like those house visits that I did, and we'll have to be careful because of COVID-19 and everything, obviously, but we need that depth of gathering information if we truly want to hear people's voices and make sure that we're equitable in our approach. So, other questions?
Awesome.
Thank you. So just, I guess, quick summary then, just to kind of finish everything up. If anybody just wants to fast forward to the end, we reviewed the 100-day plan. Our budget is in much better financial position than we had originally projected. We're looking at 1.1 negative unassigned fund balance. We're now at about negative 580 we're projecting, so we're improving there. We have school all day, every day. Our facilities we're making progress with our facilities in terms of having long-term plans, as well as on the negotiations for the Fairfax property. We're going to enter into the OBA process in order to right-size our budget, and we're going to be sharing that information with the board and with the community. And then from that, we'll take it into strategic planning, which we'll be identifying 3 to 5 goal areas. And we'll be working with the board on that piece. We'll be working with all levels of the school district and community in order to come up with those 3 to 5 goals. When we get to the spring, we can then set our budgets to that based on a sustainable model and look at moving forward. And we've got some strong, we're looking at some efficiencies where by the time we need to start adding those levy dollars in, we hope to be close to right size at that time, both through the OBA process and the budget efficiencies. Just a quick summary of what we talked about over the last hour and a half. That's all I have.
Any further questions at all from the board? Okay, that finishes our agenda here. So motion to adjourn the meeting.
I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
And a second. All right, motion been made and seconded to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.